Welcome back to Berm Peak. I'm Seth, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, but kind of the same. I'm playing devil's advocate again, but this time with old bikes. What are some of the reasons they might be better than brand new bikes? On my channel and others, you've seen new bike day videos. What's the latest and greatest thing? Well, sometimes the greatest thing you can get is an old bike, a used bike, maybe even one that's a little bit outdated. So we're gonna go through a few reasons why a bike that's been around the block a couple of times might be better than one that's brand new. So you might say, Seth, you ride a brand new bike. Your bike is brand new. Well, yeah, it was brand new 3 years ago, and now actually rides better than it did then because I've changed around parts, I've kept it maintained, and I've adjusted it exactly the way I like it. Yet if I were to sell this bike today, it would go for considerably less than you would have paid for it 3 years ago. So even if you do save up the money to buy a brand new bike, it's gonna be used pretty soon because you're gonna ride it. So why bother paying that premium up front if you're eventually gonna have to pay to maintain it in the first place? Even if a used bike needs a few parts and a little work to get back up to snuff, you're gonna have to do that eventually with a new bike very soon after getting it. So if you're not afraid of dealing with a few unknowns, a used bike can be a really good value. Of course, a new bike is gonna have the latest and greatest suspension and the latest and greatest linkage. But the stuff that was on bikes 4 or 5 years ago was plenty good too. So seeing that only a handful of the newest developments end up sticking in the long term, there's nothing wrong with getting something that was proven 4 or 5 years ago. Another benefit of used bikes, especially older used bikes, is that they can oftentimes be easier to work on. 90% of this bike can be worked on with a 3-way tool. Any set of metric hex wrenches is going to be enough to remove and reinstall the handlebars, the wheels, the chain rings, adjust the brakes. I mean, there's really not much on this bike that you can't use an adjustable wrench or a 3-way tool to work on. By contrast, on a newer bike, you're going to need one of these to remove the direct mount chain ring, you're going to need one of these to adjust the suspension, and to work on the bottom bracket, you're going to need one of these. So in addition to paying a premium for a new bike, you're also going to need to buy a whole bunch of specialty tools, or pay for a shop to use their specialty tools to fix your bike. Now, for many people, this is worth it because they want more modern equipment, but if you're just riding gravel paths and doing some light mountain biking, you do not need a bike that's super up to date, and you can probably use tools you already have to work on it. One of the things I like about all bikes, including very new bikes, is you can usually figure out how to work on them just by looking at them. All the gears and chains and parts are out where you can see them. But that's even more so with older bikes. You can take apart the hubs and individual ball bearings will fall out of it. It's usually not as important to get things torqued down to the exact right amount. And in the case of steel bikes, if something bends, you can just bend it back. Clearly, it would be easier to figure out these cantilever brakes than a modern set of hydraulic disc brakes. On most older bikes, the cables are right outside on the frame, while newer ones almost always have internally routed cables. If there's not some kind of a guide inside the frame, you're gonna have one hell of a time trying to fish one of those through. So benefit number 2 of older used bikes is they are oftentimes much easier and less expensive to work on. Now back to the point about value on used bikes, they actually hold their value better than new bikes. The second you walk out of the showroom with a new bike, it plummets in value. Meanwhile, if you buy a used bike and ride it for a year, if you take care of it, you can sell it for about the same as you bought it for. So not only does it cost less in the first place, but it will actually cost you less to keep. Just think about our flip bike videos where we buy used bikes, fix them up a little bit, and then actually sell them for more. Imagine if I was trying to do that with new bikes. The only way to make a profit on new bikes is to buy a whole bunch of them at a time and have some kind of a contract with a manufacturer. The second you touch one, it goes down in value, whereas used bikes actually go up in value as you fix them up. So if you're actually trying to buy an asset that's gonna hold its value, a used, older bike is gonna be a better decision. When I edit a video, I use a desktop computer and a linear editor. I have over 15 years experience using that. But I could see a day where tablets and touchscreens are how people edit videos. And when that happens, I'm gonna be old-fashioned and continue doing it this way because I'm gonna have 15 years of experience that I have to throw down the drain. A lot of people feel that way about bikes. So just like any technology that you've been using for years, you might not want to switch to something new because you have to learn something new. Generally, I don't think it's that big of a deal to have a cushier bike that rides better and goes faster. But maybe you're older and you have an entire shop full of specialty tools for your older bikes, and you've been riding the same trails for the last 15, 20 years. And you don't need something newer that's gonna do more things. You might actually be happier just getting an old bike that runs exactly the way you're used to. You might like the older geometry. You might like the way that they run or look. Mountain biking is a leisure activity, so whatever aspects of it bring a smile to your face are totally legitimate as far as I'm concerned. Another reason you might want a used bike, specifically a very old bike, is that oftentimes it's lower maintenance. In recent years, we've been able to make things way lighter and way higher performance, but that has not always come with longevity. An aluminum chainring doesn't last as long as a steel one. A coil fork requires less service than an air fork. And an alloy bike doesn't really have a life expectancy, whereas a carbon bike oftentimes does. Cable pull brakes do not need to be bled, and tires with inner tubes do not need to be refilled with sealant. Now, if you're riding through rock gardens at 35 miles per hour, a newer bike is going to last longer and require less maintenance. However, if that's not the type of riding that you're doing, there are many cases where an older bike will actually last a longer time and require less tinkering to keep running. So in some cases, depending on your riding style and particular situation, older bikes can last longer and require less maintenance. It's also a fact that a used bike is almost always more environmentally friendly than a new bike. So if that's a priority to you, fixing up an old bike is going to be better for the environment than buying a new one. It doesn't come with a box. It doesn't use additional fuel to get to you. It's not going to be yet another bike that is sat on a shelf in a store or in a warehouse. It's not going to come with yet again all the costs and resources that it took to bring it to market in the first place. It's also true that most old bikes don't have lithium-ion batteries in the shifters and fluid in the brakes and shocks. So if you're happier with something simpler and analog, it is more environmentally friendly. I'd be a hypocrite if I said I'd do that, since I have like 15 new bikes, but it's the facts. Another cool benefit about used bikes, even one that's 1 or 2 years old, is that it comes with the scratches included for free. In fact, because of those scratches, you're gonna pay less for it, and you're not gonna get the anxiety that comes with a brand new shiny bike. Just like when you get a brand new shiny car, that first scratch really hurts, and you might dial back your riding because of it. Inevitably, you're gonna get those scratches, the value's gonna go down, and then you're gonna ride it like you would any other bike, not really caring if it gets another scuff on it. You could just let the previous owner deal with that pain and anxiety and get a bike that's 1 or 2 years old with scuffs included. I kinda like how the scuffs and scratches tell a story. It gives them character. In fact, many people list old cars and bikes with patina as an actual selling point. So you're gonna scratch it anyway, why deal with the anxiety? You can get something that works just as good and maybe doesn't look it. So another great thing about a used bike is you just don't have to worry about it as much. So if it's a bike you're leaving on the back of your pickup truck or even commuting with, there's less of a chance of it getting stolen. And if it does, you're not going to incur as much of a liability. To a thief, an older bike is less attractive because it's harder to sell. It's not gonna sell for as much money. In fact, it might even just be perceived as less valuable because it's a little older and has scratches on it. I know we're talking about mountain bikes here, but if you were to go into New York City and look at any bike rack, you're gonna see bikes that purposely look terrible. Some people will wrap the entire frames in tape just so you can't see what brand they are. So even if you need a secondary bike that you use to get places, or you know you're gonna have to leave in sketchy places because you travel with it, sometimes a used, older bike can actually be a more sensible option. So look, I get why new bikes are exciting. I get them all the time. I love new bikes. I ride for a company that sells new bikes. You get that new paint job, you get all new shiny parts. They don't need any work. And oftentimes you get to try out a technology that's new and exciting. But the simple fact remains that older bikes, even outdated bikes, have a lot of advantages. And when I see a bike on the trails that's a little bit outdated and the rider is rocking it proudly, shredding with everyone else, I find something very admirable about that. So if you're riding an older bike and you're doing it proudly, tell me what bike you have, what you paid for it, and what it would have run you new. And on that note, if you bought your bike new 10 years ago and you're still riding it, Tell me what you saved by not buying a brand new bike every 3 years. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something or at least found it entertaining. Thanks for riding with me today, and I'll see you next time.